Jason Johnston started working at UT on August 1st as the Director of Online Learning and Course Production. He was previously at the University of Kentucky. His research interest is in the leadership of distance education programs and liberatory practices online. He has given several presentations on this topic over the years. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Johnston.
We're going to talk about how did that happen, the actions and stages of change when launching online programs. As I said, I'm going to explore the actions and environments leading to change, and then suggest a new potential change model for launching online programs. Okay, so I want to first start with a little bit of data, and it's a light board, so the classic light board, I got to start with a graph, right? I got to draw some lines. And so I'm going to draw some lines here and do a classic light board thing over here on the side. And what we have here is a little timeline grid. I'm going to go from year 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. I think you can still see that over there. As we all know, because I think most people here are somehow involved in this, online education has been growing at a very rapid pace. It was already at a rapid pace, outpacing face-to-face education. Our typical lines look something like this overall, going up to the year 19. Our overall lines year over year, we're going up steadily for public education. Overall education was looking about like this. Where it was declining, and I don't want to hear any cheers out here because we're supportive of all kinds of education, right? But where it was declining was the for-profit, fully online schools have been on a steady decline over the last few years. The not-for-profit private schools have been a slight increase, but not as much as either the public or total overall. And then we come to fall of 20. Any ideas where this graph goes from here?
Down.
Down.
Maybe like below the numbers.
Yeah, way below the numbers, exactly. No, it's exactly the opposite of that, right? In fall of 20, something happened in the spring of 2020, as you know. Kind of threw off some of our stats a little bit because everybody went online. It's not, for those of us that had been in online education, we like to call it remote education because it wasn't a planned out online learning event. It really was everybody, jumping into Zoom for their classes. However, what we saw was an incredible increase in people going online. And with the overall, same thing with the public, and slight increases for both the other places as well. Within our public, what we saw was basically a shift from just under, we're going to call this about 2 million. This is from NCES data, the IPEDS data that anybody can access online. And it was just under 2 million in 2019, okay? And then 2020 hit, and it shoots to just over 6.3 million. That's incredible, just to think about, and we all felt that, right? And just to think about how that changed during that time. NCES data doesn't have any data for fall of 21. NC-SARA data, which is another place where they calculate for schools that participate in NC-SARA, saw into 2021 about a 27% drop, okay? So we obviously had a lift here because of COVID, right? But it didn't bounce back all the way. And we were seeing this in the previous presentation, right? I think it was UT Chattanooga was talking about looking at that kind of lift, and then how it really kind of prompted them into online learning and then did not drop down all the way. And so we're still looking at probably about a 4.6 million people in the fall of students in the fall of 21, exclusively in online education. This is the number that I'm looking at here, about 4.6 million. So we have this incredible change, and we could ask a couple questions about this change. One is why, and another is how. I'm going to be getting into the how a little bit. I wondered if folks would kind of jump into the chat and let us know why you think that this change to online is happening. COVID aside, okay? COVID aside, where we're all forced, but this ongoing change, why it's happening.
So are you asking why the drop?
No, the overall change, because even with the drop, we've got between 2019, that's good, thank you for clarifying. Even with the drop between 2019 and 2020, we have effectively more than doubled our online students in public education, which is incredible. It's crazy, really, when you think about it, that a modest or good growth in education is more around the 5 or 6% range, of good growth for a school. And we're seeing it doubled over the course of 2 years. So Amy says it's become possible for everyone. Kate talks about financial implications for attending ground programs. Yeah, more accessible financially. Myra says people realize the accessibility of online teaching and they can work while attending school. Chris, access. Josh, we've been forced to create more opportunities, right? We've all been pushed into this in some ways. Some kicking and screaming, others kind of more compelled into it, seeing the opportunity. People are changing career path and need to go back to school. Yep, I think these are all reasons. And it's not the focus of my study, but some of the main reasons are all listed here in terms of access. One thing that I come up with over and over again when it comes to students is flexibility. The kind of flexibility that an online program can bring them. Oh, there we go. And Tina, flexible educational opportunity. That's right. So that's kind of the why part of things. I want to talk a little bit about the how, and this is what I was curious about. And so I took on a study where I focused on a large public university in the South that had a very large online student population. They'd been doing this for about 20 years. They were a school that had been out in front of everybody else in terms of doing an online education for students. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk to them and to really drill down into the data, get to know the people specifically who have been part of starting online programs. So I wanted to focus in on specifically what I called a distance education administrators, or DEAs. People who, they could be leaders, they could not necessarily be official leaders, they have leadership titles, but people that were kind of those change agents, those people that were on the front end of starting a program, that were kind of at the apex or the cusp of something starting and moving forward. And I wanted to talk to them to find out really how these were happening, what some of the challenges they had for starting their program was, and specifically looking at successful change to online. First, before talking to them, I looked at some major change models that are out there, ways of thinking, conceptual models, ways of thinking about how change happens in organizations. And so what I did was that I looked at 4 major change models. There was one by an author named Cotter, and another by Cummings and Worley, where they had these, they're more traditional top-down leadership models, where it was more of a kind of a classic classic way to think about how leadership happens from the top down, okay? And then I looked at another one from authors called Kouzes and Posner, and they have these 5 leadership practices. And they were much more of what we'd call a transformational model, a little bit more from bottom up, like looking at really activating people into the change experience. And then I looked at one that probably most people have heard of, especially if you're involved in technology at all, by Rogers Diffusion of Innovation Model, who really focused on more the innovation itself and then some of the actions that happened around. And then what I did basically is take these 4 models and I looked at what the similarities were, and I looked at how I could create some sort of composite to create one change model that might cover all of them, with an eye towards the innovation of a technology and the innovation, what I knew about innovating technology or innovating in terms of online education. And so this is what I came up with. That basically this 4-stage model that starts with initiate, and then get some else for my arrows, and then goes to imagine, and then goes to implement, and then to institute. Okay. And so the idea behind this is that any change that would happen would start with some sort of initiating that change. And a lot of this comes through things like motivating people, through collaborating with people. All right. And this initiate stage at the beginning. Classic leadership here in Imagine, which is to envision, you explore possibilities, you share the vision across all the levels and so on. Implementation. And this is really where you start to empower people, you start moving forward in terms of action. And you also have to be a little bit flexible. You get some feedback, you make some changes as needed at this point. And then the last one is institute, which really is more to do with sustaining and creating things like policies and figuring out how it could happen again. All right. Is that making sense so far? All right. So that was the concept based on these 4 established change models that we had. And then as I did some in-depth interviews with these people across the school that had all been part of starting successful online programs, I started to rework this change model a little bit. And from that, I was able to make a few changes. And the first change was kind of interesting to me partly because it was so classic in typical corporate top-down leadership kind of models, which was there was very little of the imagine stage that I found in the data. A few people that were actually implementing online programs forward were spending any time envisioning or exploring or really sharing it across platforms and so on. And so what I did right away is, so there's 5 different things that I used to kind of rework this after all the data came in. And the first one was I found that this one just didn't happen, at least for these successful ones in the school. And instead, what I found was that this initial stage kind of blended into this. And it kind of created a longer initiate stage. The other thing that I found that I had thought there would be some sort of clear point of decision where they just decided to go online, and that would be somewhere in the middle right here before implement. And that wasn't the case either. And on top of that, what I found that there was no really clear demarcation between the different stages. So instead of this kind of clear kind of a stage by stage approach, what I found, at least at this school, was that our stages had quite a bit of overlap to them. And it was very difficult to pin down exactly when the initiate stage stopped and when the implement stage began. So quite often, people were still doing things part of initiate and had already implemented many aspects of the program. And the same thing with institute. And I think part of the reason is because when we're talking about higher ed, we kind of move forward in stages anyway, semester by semester, and often people don't launch one program altogether. So often they maybe do one course at a time, one semester at a time, and so on. And they may find themselves doing many of these stages all at once. So removal of imagine, no point of decision, no clear demarcation between the stages. And the fourth that we found that as part of this initiate stage, one really significant action that these DEAs had to perform was to get approval. And for anybody that's worked in higher ed for very long, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. It is often an uphill battle to get things approved in order to move forward. Sometimes people, they may have a great innovation that they want to move forward, and it takes forever to get those approval stages set in order to do it. And so this not only was an action, but became this enormous barrier for the rest to happen for these DEAs, and tended to be probably the biggest frustration for every DEA. One of them said, and this was his quote, that he said that trying to get his program approved was the only and largest frustration in teaching online for 20 years. It's really the only thing. And so that tended to be a big thing right across the board in terms of people really trying to move things forward in terms of online programs. And then the last thing, and this was actually huge because it wasn't part of my entire structure to begin with, but what I found in the data was that over and over again, that these DEAs were talking about how important the infrastructure was. So they would talk to, and they would talk about it in different ways. I call it infrastructure, but they would talk about it as the institutional ecosystem, how important it was for the culture in the institution as they were open to change and adapting to online, institutional knowledge, institutional capital, and what one DEA called wraparound support. And so this was the arrow that kind of came out of nowhere for me as I was looking at the data, which I will kind of do like this. And this idea of wraparound support, where whatever these DAs were doing, and they're typically in a department or in a college, and whatever they did, they had this support that was able to back them up. They didn't always need it. They didn't always rely on it. But the fact that it was there was very important in terms of them being able to be successful. And some used it more than others, but it was very successful for them. So, and this support included a couple things at this university, which was really training, what I would kind of call training, and then ongoing support. Training tended to be both kind of more technical, but also when it came to teaching online. And then the same thing with support, tended to be that technical as well as training, that ongoing pedagogical kind of support. So that is kind of the model that, and I have a prettier one that I could send people if you wanted to email me or anything like that. But that is the model that I kind of came up with after going through the data and responding back. I wondered at this point if there are any questions. And Igor, because I've got my window set up here, I'm going to have you look at the chat if you would, and just let me know if you see any questions there about this model. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of practical implications, and then we can do some kind of larger kind of questions at the end.
There are no questions yet.
Any questions about the clarity of the model or challenges to the model?
No questions in the chat yet.
Okay. So let's move on then to practical implications, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. I really see three kind of practical implications from this. One is that I hope this idea of a change model could be used in programs to help start the conversation, to work with stakeholders, to think about what it takes to start an online program, and to also encourage innovators and people to step forward to do it. The other thing from this that is really, I think, really important to think about as a large bureaucratic system is how can we reduce this systematic bureaucracy here in order to streamline this process, and so that we have people that perhaps are much more, perhaps they are really innovative. They want to really move forward with something, and that we can give them a little bit more of a road to travel on so that they can move forward with fewer hindrances. Some of this could happen, maybe reducing that through changes of some policy to kind of speed some things up, to try to, as programs, when you identify these people to start programs, to really be sensitive to having conversation with them, hearing from everybody in terms of what some of the barriers are, to be transparent about what's going on in a college or a program, to maybe approach things from more of a design thinking standpoint, to really have an openness to changes on that end. So using the change model, reducing systematic bureaucracy, and then I think the last is really the importance of infrastructure in the process. And this could be infrastructure that you build into your own program or department, or it could be infrastructure that is reflected in something like OIT or OLAP. And I did this research before I became part of OLAP, I'll just let you know. So I didn't have a strong bias in that way. I actually was, when I did this research, I was part of one single college. And I probably, frankly, had some sense that that at the time that maybe we could do it all ourselves, that we didn't need a larger infrastructure behind us. But I think that there's a lot of strength in thinking about what a program can rely on to really help push a program forward, online program forward to start. So those three things really: using the new change model, starting conversations, reducing bureaucracy, and the importance of the this infrastructure in the process. Questions or comments? I guess I could ask one kind of more pointed question. Anyone out there that has been part of starting a program? I know there's at least a couple people out there. Does this change model seem to kind of resonate with you, or what would you change about it in your own experience? And you could either put in the chat or you can unmute and talk.
Jason, maybe while we wait for that, I do have a question for you, if that's all right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you for talking us through this model. I'm curious, I think sometimes, especially some of the events in the last couple of years, there's so much change happening and there's maybe not the opportunity to reflect on change models. And so for the kind of like the your data and the institution that you researched, was there like an intentional thought about how we're going about change, or was it kind of entirely like a reflection on what were the stages that happened? And is the recommendation that as we think about a change moving forward, that we plan utilizing a change model? And do you have any sense on how often that actually happens, or if we're consistently in this kind of reaction mode and then on the back end, we reflect back and see the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think every DEA that I talked to, it was not intentional. I had a number of them say, like, basically, I walked them through this change model after getting a bunch of data from them and talking to them about what happened and so on. And I had one of them say, wow, I wish somebody had told me about this. I wish somebody had kind of helped me anticipate all these stages. And so I think in higher ed, I think we are just reacting often. One, two, I think people they know, the people that were initiating change, they weren't leadership management consultants or educators or these people that have really studied this. They were people that were, there's an aerospace scientist. There is somebody that was, doing public service stuff, somebody that was in some sort of retail management or whatever, And so they had their areas that they were really focused on. And so I think that this was much more of a reflective process and not something that they were doing proactively at this particular school. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Igor, I saw a couple of chats come up. Would you mind reading those? Because I don't want to mess up with the system here.
Yeah. Kate said it's hard for me to say because ours happened so long ago and it occurred very slowly over time.
Yeah.
And Chris Emberton chimed in. She says, that was my thought, Kate. Many programs eventually morph into an online option. I'm not as familiar with full online programs shift.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's the case. My experience, at least talking to these folks, were a variety of experiences of starting. So from one that it happened over time, over a couple of years, basically, it took time to kind of get through everything and go from this kind of initiate stage all the way up to one. And this is just where you can believe it because we all work in higher education. But there was one where a director in a program read in the local newspaper that his college was going to start an online program. He went to his dean and said, I didn't know anything about this, do you? And his dean said, no. And they said, well, we better start it if the newspaper says we're going to start it. And I think that was the quickest one. And he had about 3 months maybe from reading the newspaper to program start. And because it had already been in some ways approved by the public and people were excited about this program and they were inquiring about it, that it kind of helped push everything along. And there was a variety of ways in which people kind of interacted with the different change along the way. And feel free to email me if you think of any questions, if you want to see a prettier presentation or slideshow or anything like that. I'm happy to send you that your way, or start a conversation. We've got a great team here with Josh and Jennifer and others that are happy to talk with anybody that would like to start or would like to have some more information about starting an online program.
Thank you, Dr. Jay.
Thanks, everybody.